Hey folks, Dennis here with Las Vegas Worm Farm and the Living Soil community, and it's time for our worm topic of the week. This week we're going to be diving into summertime stuff. We're still talking about summertime because we're in the middle of it. It's the second week of July, so the sun is in full effect, and we're supposed to be hitting 111, 112 degrees. I think might even go up to like 114 this week. So if you're living in the Southwest, stay inside and hydrate. If you're anywhere else in the country, keep cool. So with that being said, how does this affect our plants, right? A lot of our plants, they get stressed out when the temperatures start increasing, and you can see that through the way they look. Some of them will start leaning over, some of them start wilting, right? Maybe the leaves will start getting really crispy on the edges. These are all signs that your plant is stressed out, and it could be caused by heat stress. So what does all of this actually do, right? Well, the sun produces heat, which is very powerful, right? It's got a lot of rays, and when those rays push onto any surface, it gets hot. Think about your car, right? If it sits outside, even a white car, if it sits outside and gets blasted by the sun, it's going to get hot. Your plants are no different. They're going to get hot, and then they're going to get stressed out. So there's a few things that we can do to be able to cool that, but not just your plant. Let's also look at the soil. If your soil is exposed to all of the elements and the sun, right, it is going to cook and bake. And that is not going to be good for your plants, because your plant is in the soil and the roots are there. And yeah, things just start to cook. So we have to make sure that we're protecting everything. And that's kind of what we're going to go into today. The first thing I kind of want to cover is like shade. Shade is probably one of the best ways to kind of protect your plants, especially during the summertime. But there's different types of shade. So the first one I want to talk about is like natural shade. If you are growing in pots, plants, you can move those around. You can put them in different places, right? So you can move them to natural shade. So if you've got a patio cover, right, or an awning, if you've got a shade cloth that you've put up, if you've got a tree out in the corner, right, we can move all of those pots or those containers or those trays over there into the shade, which will protect the plant, reduce the amount of stress that it is getting from the harsh sun, especially here in the Southwest. Now, that's great if you're in containers. Now, if you're not in containers, then how do we get natural sun? Because you're not going to rip your plant up and move it, right? Well, the long-term solution is put a shade tree in, right? You should have planted what's that saying? The best time to plant a tree was 10 years ago, and the next best time is now. Well, you could plant that, but that's going to take time. So the only other option that we really can go with is to help protect our plants is to put up a shade cloth. Shade cloths work. They definitely do, and they come in different shapes and sizes, which we'll jump into here in a sec. If you've ever gone outside in your garden, which you have if you're watching this, a hat makes a heck of a lot of difference, right? Like, especially if you got one of those wide brim ones, right? Like sombrero style, like they're covering your shoulders, they're covering your neck. I mean, it kind of keeps things cool. Now up here, it's going to get hot, right? Like it always gets hot up here unless you got one of those fancy hats with the fans on it, but it protects a lot of things, and it allows you to stay outside a lot longer because the sun's not directly on you, and the shade cloth is going to do the same thing. Now, one thing to remember when we're picking out shade cloths is that they come in different ratings, shade ratings, percentages, right? So you have 10%, 20%, 30, 40, 50, 60, all the way up to 90% shade. And that's how much shade it provides, right? Now, all of these cloths come in different materials. You can go from like all plastic to a combination of it. Some of them are, fabric. They also have, the aluminum. I think it's not called aluminum, but it's like an aluminum kind of one that is reflective. So they come in all different types. The shade rating is going to be what you're really what you're going to want to focus on, because if you're growing food or flowers, the plant is going to need a certain amount of light in order for it to be able to produce those. If you have too much shade, it will not produce. Perfect example is in my garden. I planted strawberries on the edge, and they have taken over my entire corner. I call it berry corner, right? But a lot of those do not produce because they're right under a massive shade tree, and it's all shaded out from pretty much the whole day. Not going to produce. But the strawberries that are on the edge, right, that are not shaded by the tree, guess what? They produce. They produce a lot more than the other ones that are in the shade. So what I'm trying to say is that you have to make sure that you balance the shade with sunlight because your plants are going to need that. Looks like my tab is my video is trying to end. So we're not going to end it. We're going to come back to it. So you have to balance the type of shade, the amount of shade that you're going to provide. What I recommend is that if you don't know, or you're like, boy, oh boy, I know I heard Dennis talk about this, but like, what am I going to pick? Pick something in the middle. So about 50% will still get you enough sunlight so that you can produce fruits and veggies and flowers, right? But it also produces or shades enough to be able to protect the plant from the harsh elements or the sunlight, right? So I would say stick around that regime around 50% and you'll be a-okay. You can go lower, but you might not get as much protection. If you go too high, again, you're going to run into that. My plants aren't going to produce for me, which growing food, that's what you want them to do. So the next thing we're going to look at is kind of the material, or not the material, whatever, the material, whatever you're going to buy. The cheaper it is, the less likely it's going to last for a long time. Usually the more money it costs, the higher quality it actually is. So if you go with a commercial grade, it's going to outlast and outdo anything that's going to be, from a small manufacturer that is a lot cheaper, right? Ask me how I know. I bought shade cloth. There's commercial grade shade cloth and it lasts for a very long time, years and years, and it doesn't degrade very rapidly over a long period of time because it's got UV protection built in. Whereas if you buy some of the cheap stuff, I bought 4x8 foot shade cloths that last, not even a few months. They start unraveling, the seams come apart. They're not even stitched in the right places. The corners don't hold, you name it. So if spend a little bit more and you'll get a better cloth that you can use over and over and over again. So that's what I'm trying to say here. And then if you do, around 50% will keep you safe. Don't go too high, don't go too low, but 50% will keep you in a safe part. Now, if you've made it this far in the video, if you like this type of content, do me a favor, give it a like, give it a share, because only about 10% of my videos actually get likes or get shares, and that will go to other people who like and share it. So I appreciate that if you could do that. But now let's get back to it. So the next thing I kind of want to talk about is you providing, taking your plants, if you're growing in pots and containers, being able to move them, right? That's the nice thing about having them in containers. There's also like these big raised beds that are actually on wheels, and you can actually move them from one area to the next. Really cool. I like that concept. Not so functional here in the desert because it's so hot. I need more mass to be able to keep things cool. But in other locations where you have, better climates, it doesn't get as cold, it doesn't get as hot, those can be fantastic for you, right? Like if I go back to Texas, I would definitely use one of those because you can move it around on wheels and it doesn't get, it doesn't get baking hot out there. And if I can keep it in shade, that's fantastic. But something, if you can move it back and forth, you can find a different location for it, right? And that location will change every season, right? So the summer, the sun is in a different location. In the fall, spring, it's in a completely different location. And then in the wintertime, it might be different if you can grow during the winter. But you have to keep that in consideration because the location that you put your plants in for one season might not be the best location for the next season. My patio cover covers pretty much all of my grass in the wintertime, as in the shade covers all of the grass. But in the summertime, it gets all sunlight. So I have to keep that in mind, right? And you should do the same thing if you have containers or pots or plants that you can move from one location to the other. It's fantastic to be able to do that, but you run into other issues, right? The next thing that I like to address is that when you have these containers or these pots, right, they tend to be very, very sensitive to temperature changes. So that means if you stick it out into the sun, right, that pot will probably heat up a lot quicker than the soil that's on the ground or in a raised bed or even a bigger pot. So a couple of other recommendations that I have that I've done is if you've got multiple pots or a bigger pot, you can take that pot, put it in a bigger pot, and that will help keep the pot cooler. keep the soil cooler, right? And what we're doing here is not necessarily shading the plant, but we're providing some protection for the soil. So we were talking about how to protect the plant with a shade cloth and stuff, right? But protecting the soil is just important, because if you bake the soil, right? I mean, there's water in there and it gets hot and you got roots. Now you're cooking roots, right? Not only that you're cooking roots, but you're also cooking the microorganisms that are in that soil. If they die, then there's no nutrients for your plants. So protecting the pot or the soil is just as important. Now you can put it in bigger containers, like I said. Another option for you, I know you're going to hear me say the M word, but mulch, right? Put mulch on top of the soil. That will absolutely help. Um, and if you've got a lot of pots, what I've seen people do is they will take boards and they will line them up, and then they will put the plants inside of the board so that it's protected from the outside, from the outside. And that way you can stack a bunch of plants together in a line and it's more organized, right? And you don't need an individual pot for each one. You can use boards to be able to do that. Now, I've also tried using stone, right? Like pavers or things like that. You can set them up and put the plant behind it so it's protected from the sun. The sun will beat on the rock or the stone, but it won't necessarily hit the pot directly. So that provides some protection. Another really cool thing I've seen is people buy umbrellas, and they will pull the handle off, right, from like the Dollar Tree or whatever, and they will take these small umbrellas and they will put them in their pots over their plants. So if you've got, a 30-gallon pot or something like that that's bigger, you can take this umbrella, put it over there, and keep your plants protected. Pretty cool idea. Pretty innovative. I think that's the right word. So that's another option for you. But we want to make sure that we're protecting the soil, because protecting the plant is important, but protecting the soil is also important. Healthy soil or cool soil means that you'll have a healthy and cool plant. All of this kind of works together, right? The one thing that we want, the reason I always focus on the soil is because the soil creates the nutrients for the plant, right? Like even when the plant is, let's say, not shaded, right? It's in full sun, but you protect the pot, the biology in the soil is still like, oh, this is a happy, good place to be. So it's continuing to make nutrients for the plant, right? It's continuing to feed on the exudates from the plant. It's continuing to break down the organic material, the compost, the wood chips, the coco coir, the peat moss, whatever you use in your potting mix, right? It's going to continue to break that stuff down and release nutrients to your plants. That's super important, because if your plant is not in shade and it is getting beaten down by the sun, if it has all these nutrients, it's going to be able to resist a lot better than if it didn't have all the nutrients, right? It's kind of like how irritable do you get if you haven't eaten and it's hot? Probably a lot. If you're like me, it's like, here's a Snickers, if you guys haven't seen that commercial, it's a Snickers commercial. But the plants are the same way. If they're not getting food and they're not getting water and you put them outside, they're going to be angry and they're going to want a Snickers too, right? So you have to give them food. And if you can protect the soil, you have a higher probability of having a happy and healthy plant. And that's just by moving the pot to a different location, keeping the pot covered, right? Or just shading the entire area, the plant and the pot. Now, the final option you have is planting another plant next to it. We kind of already talked about the big shade tree, right? And how you can put pots and plants underneath that shade tree. You can also put bigger plants. So if you've got a Texas mountain laurel that you're growing, they grow pretty big, right? If you've got that pot, just slide it over in front of all of your seed trays, right? Or something like that if you're starting seeds. Like that'll keep that protected, especially when the sun is going down, right? Like in the evening or the afternoon into the evening, that's probably when they need to be shaded, because that's when the sun is at its strongest or at its peak. Not necessarily like peak directly up above, but as in like peak, like power, UV rays. What am I trying to say here? You know what I'm trying to say? It is in the afternoon, it is very strong, the UV rays and everything. So you want to provide the protection then. Not so much in the morning or in the afternoon, because then, the temperatures are still kind of cool. But as the sun goes down, it starts getting more and more more concentrated. So that's really when you want to protect it. So if you've got a bigger plant, right? Like I've got some, what are they called? Ponytail palm trees in the back, right? They're in like 30-gallon pots. I can put that plant, I can put it there to provide shade for my other smaller plants. So when I'm starting like seeds, or I buy transplants or I buy, the plants that are dying from Home Depot, from the big box store like Home Depot or Lowe's, I can put them in the shade of that plant so they're protected, so I can rehabilitate them, get them back before I stick them in full sunlight. So those are some of the kind of tips that you can do. So first thing is reduce the amount of sunlight there is, and you can do that either naturally or uh, with like trees, bushes, right, or shady areas, a patio, something like that. The next thing is create shade, where you go buy a shade covering or a shade cloth and you protect your plant, or a little umbrella that you can put in the pot to protect it, right? Keeping everything cool. We also have to make sure that we're maintaining a cool soil, right? We want to make sure that those microorganisms stay alive in there. So if you have a potted plant or something like that, then put that in a bigger pot, or put it behind a companion plant, right? Like shade it, like we talked about. And the final thing is the M word: put mulch on your soil. That helps out so much. And that doesn't matter if you're in a pot or if you're in the ground. Put mulch. Absolutely put mulch. You don't want the sun frying that soil, heating it up as much as possible and killing all the biology that's creating nutrients and keeping your plant happy and healthy. We want to avoid that to the maximum extent possible. So keep the soil covered with mulch. That's all I really have for you guys for today. Hopefully you found this information useful. If you did, give it a like, share, and we'll see y'all next week. All right, bye now.